And that means thinking of creatures not as objects. And this is where I want to get back to the distinction I introduced right at the beginning between interaction and correspondence. Mostly, when we talk about relations between humans and non-humans, when we talk about actor networks and networks of relationships, we envisage something like this. We envisage each participant as a sort of little circle or a dot. And then we join them up and say, here's a network. And we might put some arrows on here and there, like this. They're always pointing both directions to show that everything in the network is both acting on everything else, and everything else is acting on everything back to this way, that way. So each of these things, each of these double-headed arrows is an interaction. But that's to treat these participants as things that are wrapped up in themselves. But living beings are not wrapped up in themselves. They're continually becoming. They're continually undergoing a process of life in which they are, so to speak, making themselves in the world through the engagements they have with other creatures. So what I want to do is to take each of these and turn them from being wrapped up in itself into a line. So there's one of them. Let's say that's A. Now here's another one. Let's say that's B. And so on. We can have all the others. And so on. All of them are going on. In this case, the arrow is just going in one direction. It's not a back and forth. So interaction is a back and forth between points. This is what I'm calling correspondence. And I want to argue that it's in the correspondence of ongoing lives that we find the essence of the social. And the image I have in mind here is of musical polyphony. So it's very popular these days to talk about parts and wholes and talk about this kind of arrangement as an assemblage, putting a number of parts together into a whole. It is not necessarily complete. One can always add further bits, but it's like you're sort of sticking things together to form a sort of conglomerate, and the part is like one bit of that conglomerate. But in music, the part is a line. It's a particular, if it's choral music, it's the line that the tenor or the alto or the soprano is singing, and as it is singing, it's continually responding in counterpoint to the other lines, so that as every animal life is carrying on, it's also responding all the time to the lives that are carrying on with it, so that we can begin to think of parts more like lines of musical polyphony than as objects of an assemblage. It's like taking an interaction, this thing, it's like taking that interaction and putting it in movement, putting it in a dimension basically of time, so that we begin to see it as carrying on. And it's by turning these from objects into carryings on that we turn the object into a verb. So now we have not human beings, but human becomings, who are, what they do is what they are. They are humaning. We have reindeer who are reindeering, baboons who are babooning. And as they carry on, so lives become entangled and intertwined. So it's not unreasonable for a Sami person to say, I've got reindeer on the brain. Literally, they have. It's not unreasonable for a baboon researcher like Strum to say that somehow she feels only herself when she's with her baboons, that outside the company of the baboons, she's somehow left feeling lost and inadequate, that her life has become so bound up, as we say, with the lives of her research subjects, the animals, that she feels incomplete without them. It's quite reasonable to argue that a reindeer that has become accustomed to the camps, the sounds and the smells of human camps, has become, in some sense, the reindeer it is because of the way it's lived in proximity to humans. So that every animal is becoming the particular animal it is through the history of its relationships with others. Of course, that does have enormous consequences if we start thinking about animals in that kind of way, because it makes the whole concept of species a very difficult one to sustain. Because it's to say that, for example, a baboon that has been brought up in the company of human researchers is not actually the same kind of animal as a baboon that's been brought up mainly in the company of other baboons. But it also means we can no longer be content with the idea, as Latour puts it somewhere, that a sociology of the standard kind, the sociology of the social, is fine for baboons, he says. It just doesn't work for humans. Meaning that it's okay, we can use standard sociology as long as we're talking about non-human animals that are not bothering with anything outside its own conspecific ambit, but with humans that doesn't work. But this is nonsense, because even if you're a baboon, you have to deal with a lot more than other baboons. You have to eat. You have to pay attention to dangerous predators in your environment. You have to relate to the world around you, which includes all kinds of other beings. So that even for the baboon, the community is a hybrid community of creatures of different sorts. And every creature is becoming the creature it is in and through that history of ongoing correspondences with other lives. I just wanted to end with one final thought. I don't know if whether any of you have come across the latest fashion. The philosophical fashions come and go, but one of the latest fashions is a thing called object-oriented ontology, known for short as OOO. Looks like that. And the object-oriented ontologists are on the face of it saying something rather similar to what I'm saying, which is that we should let everything in the world be itself in its own right. And I'm saying that. Let reindeer be reindeer. Let baboons be baboons. Let humans be humans. Let them do their thing in their animate, mutable, engaged way. Don't just treat them as signs or objects for recruitment into human society. So maybe, but what the object-oriented ontologists are saying is that every object, at the end of the day, retreats into itself. It is fundamentally and ultimately its own thing. I could engage with this glass, I could pick it up, I can drink from it, but somewhere inside, the glass is a glass is a glass. There's a fundamental objectness to it, which resists any attempt of me to try and turn it into something of my own. But there is a big difference between what I'm proposing here and what the object-oriented ontologists are proposing. What we have in common is both are saying that you don't necessarily have to have humans around to have relationships of any kind. So that, and they present it as a big discovery. Wow, things, rocks and plants and animals can relate to one another without there being any humans there. So this is a great philosophical discovery, although, of course, ecologists have been studying these things for decades. But I agree, too. Of course, you can have correspondences going on. No one of these lines needs to be a human line. You don't have to have humans there at all. That we have in common. The difference is that these lines are alive. They're moving. They're growing. The object-oriented ontologists are everything is inside itself. So the kind of world that the object people want, the world of objects, is one in which everything is fossilized. Everything is, in the end, contracted into itself. So it's a world in which fundamentally nothing moves, in which there is no time. And mine is a world, I think, in which everything moves. So as against the objects of object-oriented ontology, I've got what I want to call a WWO, a world without objects. In a world of lines, there are no objects at all. Everything is moving, flowing, responding to one another. And that's because we have to think of things in the first place, not as blobs, like this, but as lines. There I'll stop. Thank you.